Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing good today. So, do you know what is API gateway? I also don't know. So, before making this video, I also don't know. So, after making this video, I have learned something more good about this API gateway. So, being as an SRE or developer or a DevOps engineer or cloud ops engineer, so you should be knowing what is API gateway since you will be handling lot of microservices. So, API gateway is very important, and in this particular video, we will be talking about what is API gateway and what are all the components. So just get into the video. Okay. So first, what is API gateway? API gateway is an infrastructure component that sits between a client and the collections of microservices. So it will be in between your microservice entire cluster, and then like it will be standing in between of client and the microservice. Okay. So serving as a single entry point to the system, it primarily function is to route incoming requests to the appropriate microservices and authenticate, authorize the client, perform the other cross-cutting functions such as rate limiting, throttling, caching, what are this? We have allowed deny rest, service discovery, circuit breaking, and all those things. API gateway can also act as a layer of abstractions between the client and underlying microservice, hiding the implementation detail and providing a unified interface to the outside world. So this can be useful in scenarios where the microservice architecture is complex and different services have a different protocol, message formats, and authentications mechanism. Okay, so to conclude, an API gateway helps to manage and secure a system API by providing a centralized point of context. It's a POC, and then abstractions and allowing more efficient and flexible development and deployment of microservices applications. Okay, so next we will talk about something on API components. So API components, it has very large number. So without wasting any time, just check out all the components. If you miss any one of the component, you will be missing some knowledge. Routing component of an API gateway is responsible for receiving incoming API request. Basically, like it acts as a load balancer. So it gets and direct them to the appropriate microservice. It will route the request to the appropriate backend. Basically, like have a context called API 1 and API app 2 or app 3 or DB1, DB2, something would have been there. So it has to route it to the proper request. Okay, so proper request has to route it to the proper microservices. But if it is running on pods, you can route it to the service. If it is running on just normal on VM, you can route it to your, which is the appropriate Nginx server, and then it will associate the backend server. So that is what it's saying. Okay? So directing them to the appropriate microservices or backend services based on the request API and the endpoint or URL. Authentication and authorization. So this components handles authentication and authorization of the client accessing the APIs. So it may support the various authentication methods such as OAuth, API keys, custom authentication mechanism. So it also enforces the authentication policy to ensure that only authorized client can access the specific API or resources. So this is very simple and very cool, right? So if you are using something called gRPC protocol, so when it connects to one API to another API, it will create some kind of token. So those authentication mechanism has to be stable and it has to be clearly defined it somewhere in your routing layer. So this is the one. So it uses a lot of API keys, a lot of tokens, a lot of OAuth mechanisms and all those things. So it will implement or enforce this particular policy over there. Okay, rate limiting and throttling. So this component manages the rate of your API request or process to prevent the abuse of overload of the system. So it enforces the rate limit and throttling the policy to control the frequency and volume of the API request for the client. Say someone is doing some DDoS attack, okay, or someone hitting your applications very frequently, and it's creating some cause of an issue. So you can limit it, right? So per day, or this particular person can hit our website just 100 times or something. If someone does any DDoS attack, if they sends around 1 lakh requests to the this particular API gateway, so it can limit, right? It can only send only 10. If it goes more than, it will reject the request. So those things it can configure. Caching. Caching is a performance optimization technology that stores frequently request data in the memory and to reduce the overhead of the repeated processing. So it's very cool, right? So we have a lot of in memories, the data stored like Redis, Memcached, Hazelcast. Too many things do we have, right? So So basically, like, it will be acting as an in-memory data store as well. So this caching component of an API gateway may cache the API responses or other relevant data, say for example cookie or something like browsers cookies and all those things, to improve the API performance and reduce the latency. It doesn't allow to hit into the server. It will just serve it from the cache, like CDN, content delivery network. Exactly. Okay, logging and monitoring. So this component is responsible for capturing and logging an API request and response data for the monitoring, auditing, troubleshooting, and other purpose. ELK, basically you can think about it, or Splunk, or Kibana, and all those things, right? So it may be also provide a real-time monitoring alerting capability to track the performance and the health of your API. Transformation and the protocol conversion. The transformation, this component may provide a data transformation and protocol conversion capability to translate between a different type of formats, message protocols, API versions. So it may also handle the data validation, enrichments, filtering as needed. Okay, coming back to the security. Security is a critical component of API gateway. So it may include features like SSL termination, encryption, threat detection, and input validation. Ensure that API are secure and protected against the attacks, vulnerabilities, and data breach. So it scans everything, right? It holds entire SSL layer data and everything. So it keeps the environment secure. Parameter validation. Okay, this component checks the validity of the input parameters. So for example, like your API has certain parameters, it should be validated. Okay, so it has to be ensured that before hitting the request has to get some validation over there. So straightly you cannot access the API. So if the requested parameter is not there, it will reject the request. Say for example, this particular request has to access along with the token. If token is not there, a token is expired, you cannot access the API. So that's the thing, right? This component checks the validity of the input parameter passed to the API and ensure they conform to the expected data types and the format. So it's very important in your HTTP header. You can have to make sure these things are been in place before accessing an API. So if it is not there, it will reject it. So this will help prevent an errors. Exactly, we can see a lot of exceptions. SRE will scratch their head. What is this? This error, why it is coming? Why it is allowed? Why it is not allowed? A lot of things will happen, right? And security issues, right? Exactly. So if someone is accessing your API without an API token, and if the user is supposed to access it, it will be a vulnerable, and it will be a data breach, right? It's a security issue. It's caused by invalid input data, and too many things will happen. So if the token is not set to expire, it token is it's not expired, it's full time. If someone gets the token and access the API, it will be a problem, right? Okay, service discovery. Service discovery is a process of dynamically locating and tracking the availability and the location of the microservice in a distributed system. API Gateway can use service discovery to determine the location of the microservice it needs to the routed request. If service discovery, I have given a complete video on this particular topic. You have to go ahead and check it, so you will get a neat idea about what is service discovery, how exactly the pools will get dynamically updated, and how the request will be hit to a good node instead of bad node. If bad node is down, it will automatically remove the bad node IP from their the front end pool. All those things, right? Allow and deny list. So it's an ACL. Okay, access control list. API gateway uses allow and deny list to restrict an access to the specific APIs resources based on such as IP address, user role, other attributes. It's completely correct. So if you're coming with some other IPs which is not supposed to exist, say for example, if it is some IPs been originated from some other country, okay, so for example, like if it is originated from Russia or some other China. If you don't want to allow those IPs to access your API, yes, agreed. Okay, you can deny those things and you can put it in your ACL. You can do it. And similarly, like the users as well, the roles as well. This particular user has this kind of roles, okay, and he should not access this kind of API over here. Okay, so you can define those rules and as well. Rules as a role and attributes and all those things you can define it. Say for example, I'm an admin. Okay, I want to access this API. Yeah, admin can access. Non-admin cannot access this particular API. There should be some restrictions. You can define it. Okay. Okay, error handling. So error handling is something the component handles the error that occurs during an API request and also provides appropriate error messages to the client. Okay, so it may also log error and provide an error notification for monitoring and troubleshooting purpose. Circuit breaking. Circuit breaking is a cascade failure. I have created a complete video on this particular topic. You can go ahead and check about it. This circuit breaking is very important, and you should know what is the cascade failure. And if the cascade failure happens, the entire API will get impacted. API service will get impacted. Dependent API service also will get impacted. So that's what it talks about. Circuit breaking is a technique of managing and mitigating an errors in a distributed systems. Okay, API gateway can use circuit breakers to isolate the faulty microservice and prevent the cascade failures. Okay, so that's all I have, guys. I hope you might have enjoyed this particular video. Please do support, and please do subscribe it. I will see you on another good lecture. Thank you so much.